Here is a question for you. Can you tell where one object ends and another begins? In some places you can, and in other places it's not as easy. That's completely intentional. In fact, some of the most important edges in this painting are the ones I chose not to paint. Hi, I'm Brienne. One of the biggest mistakes that beginning artists can make is that they treat every edge with the same importance. So every leaf is outlined, all the roof lines are sharp, and the edges of the shadows are crisp. But this is not how we actually see the world. I'm going to show you today how you can use lost and found edges to simplify a busy scene, connect your value shapes, and guide the viewer's eye to what really matters most in your painting. Let me show you what I mean. Here is the reference photo for my painting. Where do I want the viewer's eyes to go? That's what we should ask ourselves. Well, the obvious point that I picked was this person right here, and we can see him very clearly because of the light value of the sun on his head with the dark shape behind. So that's going to draw the eye. But we also want to pay attention to our edges. So every edge we don't want hard. So for instance, here with the roof in the sky, that edge could be soft because those values are similar. Then it's hard here where the roof meets the dark trees behind. And then with these shadows, there's some hard edges that help draw the eye down. We also have this wonderful horizontal line, which helps to focus the eye here. But then there's other areas like within the windows and the sides of the building and within the trees where we could lose some edges. This is what I like to think about before every painting. Now, with talking about lost and found edges, remember it's about finding the value shapes that are adjacent to each other, that are either close in value. If they're close in value, like in here and here, then that's a great place to have a lost edge. You can change color, but it's a way to connect the shape, and then the edge is nice and soft and lost, okay? But other edges where you've got a dark, high contrast, you have a dark shape next to a light shape, there is going to be a hard line. So that's a found edge. So a lot of it comes down to the value shapes and how they relate to each other, the adjacent shapes. This is one reason why I think a value study is so important before every painting. So I've already done the first wash. I'm just going to show you some of the areas where I think about connecting edges or having soft edges and having hard edges. So at this point, I'm painting that back tree that's behind the house, and I'm thinking of blobs with finesse. So for those, if you haven't seen my video on painting masses of trees, please check that out. But it's basically masses and then finessing the edges. But notice how I'm very careful to go around the edge of the house at this time. Right? So I'm thinking of the greens, varying my greens as I go, but trying to just make big masses with variation of color and then getting a few indication of leaves and branches. Now, even though I was so careful to paint that edge, what I'm going to do while that big shape is damp, I'm going to go right into the shadow shape. That's why I preloaded a brush with green and a brush with this grayish purplish color for the shadow. And notice I'm letting that line bleed in. This is a soft edge. Now, eventually I will be going and adding in some darks into that tree, but I still have areas where I'll lose the edge. So after putting in some of that, I'm going to keep going right down the shadow of the house. I'm not going to let things dry. So basically that bluish color, I'm going to adjust to see how I'm making it warmer. So a little more red and yellow into the shadow that's under the eave. And I will paint that while it's wet. And this becomes a lost edge because the values of all of these are very similar. But I'm changing color as I go, or I'm adjusting temperature as I go. This is a lot to do with how I paint. Making this one big shape, this one big middle value shape, and painting through it with changing the colors. So now I'm warming it up even more with more transparent yellow oxide. But I'm not letting anything dry because I want them to blend together. So a lot of these will end up being soft edges. But I'm also keeping the hard edges, like where that under eave meets the top of the roof, which is sunlit. And so definitely high contrast. So there is a hard edge there. Okay, so coming in with more shadow on the second roof, change the colors again and the value a little. Notice how I've added a little more pigment and I have control over that. But all of these are wonderful opportunities for soft edges because wet into wet. And then let me talk a little bit about the difference between hard and soft edges and lost and found edges. I actually think of them differently. The soft edges are like what you see physically, they're wet into wet, so it's soft. A hard and a lost and found edge is where two adjacent shapes, like here, the one side of the house is in front of the other, but the two adjacent shapes are the same value. So that is what I call a lost edge, right? So you can have soft edges like the windows versus the siding of the roof. See how that's soft, it's physically soft, but the value of the shapes are of higher contrast, right? So you can have a soft edge and still have adjacent shapes that have higher contrast. But if you have adjacent shapes like this house section right here, notice how I changed the turquoise just a little bit, but I'm painting it right into each other. So same value, I'm painting wet into wet, but also the values are so similar. That is a lost edge, okay? Sometimes soft edges can be lost edges, but not all the time. I hope that made sense. Now, with the garden area and those boxes, notice how I have highlighted areas. So I painted just up to that darker shape. So I have those little white highlights there, and that's a hard edge for sure. And backlighting like this is really nice for that because it gives you that nice rim light. I'm painting into my main figure, the person, and again, I want to leave a little bit of a rim light, so have that hard edge in the place I want your eye to look. I'm going to go right into this ground of the grass, and I'm going to let the bottom of the boxes blend right in. All of this is done while things are damp so that I get some soft edges. Now, here's an interesting point. So this back group of trees, I am painting right up to the house, and that is a hard edge. Well, it's not soft because those are dry, right? So they're not blending into each other. However, it is kind of a lost edge because the value of those two adjacent shapes is similar. So I still consider that a lost edge, even if it's not as physically soft. Okay, now I'm bringing in some of the darks of the trees. So I'm emphasizing a few hard edges in there. But there's still some soft edges and lost edges between the middle value of the tree and the middle value of that shadow. I bring in this darker shape here to emphasize the hard edges that I want the viewer to see. I really want to emphasize certain shapes, and that's where this darker shape can help accentuate the contrast between those lighter rimmed sunlit shapes in front. All right, for the painting, I just am finishing with a few details, and notice how a few of these details create some hard edges, but not all of it. You don't want to outline everything. Just a few detailed touches to finish the painting, and you can add as much detail or as little detail and value changes as you want. When people first start watercolor, they think that every object needs to be outlined to be understood, when in fact, a painting can look much more natural when some of the edges are lost or disappear. Lost and found edges aren't about being careless. They're about deciding what's important and what deserves attention. If every edge is important, then none of them are. It is often the edges that you choose to lose that are just as important as the ones you keep. I challenge you to try this week. For today's lesson, I talked about the edge decisions I made in this painting, but I did film this painting start to finish for my Open Studio members. If you would like to learn more from me, please join me on travelingcolorstudio.com and look for the options there. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps, and I appreciate it. Thanks, and happy painting!